The savanna breathes in the twilight hour, a slow inhale of dust and dying grass. My footsteps crunch against the earth, each step a whisper in the vast silence that stretches beyond the horizon. The air tastes of copper and time, of secrets buried beneath layers of red soil and forgotten seasons. I have walked for days through this landscape, following stories told by old men in distant villages, chasing shadows of a civilization that once commanded the trade routes of half the world. The sun hangs low, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Acacia trees stand like sentinels against the approaching darkness, their thorns catching the last light like tiny daggers. The wind carries scents I cannot name. Ancient flowers, perhaps, or the memory of incense burned in temples long abandoned. My water runs low, but something pulls me forward, a magnetism I feel in my bones, as if the very stones ahead are calling. Then I see it. At first, it appears as nothing more than a darker shadow against the darkening sky. But as I draw closer, the shadow resolves into something impossible, something that should not exist in this wild place. A wall, not the crude barrier of stacked stones that farmers might build, but something magnificent and terrible in its perfection. The wall rises from the earth like a living thing, its stones fitted together with such precision that not even a blade of grass could slip between them. No mortar binds these massive blocks, yet they stand as solid as the day they were placed, defying time and weather and the relentless hunger of the savanna. The wall stretches farther than my eyes can follow in the gathering dusk, curving away into the distance like the spine of some buried giant. It towers above me, 15 feet or more, built from granite blocks that must weigh tons each. How were such stones moved? How were they lifted to such heights without the aid of machinery, without the knowledge of pulleys and cranes? The questions multiply in my mind, but the stones offer no answers, only their silent presence and the weight of centuries. I reach out to touch the wall, and the granite is warm beneath my palm, still holding the heat of the day. The surface is smooth, worn by countless seasons of rain and wind, but the craftsmanship remains flawless. Each block fits perfectly with its neighbors, creating a surface so seamless it might have been carved from a single piece of stone. This is not the work of primitive builders. This is the achievement of master architects, of a civilization that understood engineering principles that would not be rediscovered by European builders for centuries. As darkness falls, I make my camp in the shadow of the Great Wall. The fire I kindle seems tiny against the immensity of the structure, but its light reveals details that daylight had hidden. The stones are not uniform in color. Some are pale gray, others dark as charcoal, creating subtle patterns that speak of careful selection and artistic vision. Here and there, I can make out the faint outlines of symbols carved into the rock, weathered almost beyond recognition but still visible to eyes that know how to look. The night is filled with sounds, the distant call of a nightjar, the rustle of small creatures in the grass, the crack of cooling stone. But beneath these familiar sounds, I hear something else. It is not quite a whisper, not quite a sigh, but something between the two. It seems to come from the stones themselves, as if the wall is breathing, as if it remembers when this place was alive with human voices and the bustle of daily life. I close my eyes and let my imagination drift. What did this place look like in its prime? What sounds filled the air when these walls were new? The gentle lowing of cattle, perhaps, being driven to pasture. The ring of hammers on anvils, as smiths worked the iron and gold that made this kingdom wealthy. The voices of children playing in the courtyards, their laughter echoing off the stone walls. The chanting of priests conducting rituals whose meaning is now lost to time. But tonight, there is only silence and the weight of stones that have outlived the civilization that built them. I spread my sleeping roll on the ground and prepare to spend the night in the shadow of greatness. Tomorrow I will explore further, will seek to understand what this place was and why it was abandoned. But for now, I am content to rest in the presence of these silent monuments, to feel the pulse of history in the stones around me. The stars emerge one by one, brilliant in the clear air far from any city lights. The same stars that shone down on the builders of this place, that watched over the rise and fall of the kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. Somewhere in the distance, a lion roars, and the sound rolls across the savannah like thunder. But here, within the protection of these ancient walls, I feel safe. The stones that have stood for 7 centuries will stand for one more night, keeping watch over a solitary traveler who has come to pay homage to their creators. As I drift towards sleep, I think about the word Zimbabwe itself. In the Shona language, it means houses of stone, and never has a name been more fitting. This is indeed a house of stone, but it is more than that. It is a library written in granite, a testament to human achievement carved into the living rock. It is a mystery that spans centuries, a puzzle that archaeologists and historians are still working to solve. The fire burns low, casting dancing shadows on the wall. In those shadows, I can almost see the ghosts of the past, the merchants who traded gold for Chinese porcelain, the craftsmen who shaped iron into tools and weapons, the rulers who governed this land with wisdom and strength. They are all gone now, their voices silenced, their stories half forgotten. But their greatest achievement remains, as solid and enduring as the day it was completed. I pull my blanket closer and surrender to the embrace of sleep. Around me, the ancient stones keep their vigil, guardians of secrets that may never be fully understood. In the morning, I will continue my exploration, will seek to unlock more of the mysteries that lie hidden in this place. But tonight, I am simply grateful to be here, to bear witness to one of humanity's greatest achievements, to sleep in the shadow of stones that have defied time itself. The last thing I see before sleep takes me is a shooting star, blazing across the sky like a message from the past. And in that moment, I feel connected to all the people who have stood in this place before me, all the travelers and traders and pilgrims who have looked up at these same stars and wondered at the mystery of Great Zimbabwe. We are all part of the same story, all linked by our capacity to wonder, to build, to dream of something greater than ourselves. The stones remember everything, even if we have forgotten. And in the morning, perhaps they will share some of their secrets with me. Part 2. The First Dawn, Target. Minus 25,000 characters. I wake to the sound of silence so profound it seems to ring in my ears. The fire has died to cold ash, and the first light of dawn is painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. For a moment, I am disoriented, unsure where I am or why I am lying on hard ground wrapped in a thin blanket. Then I see the wall looming above me, and memory floods back. I am in the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, the stone city that once commanded the gold trade of southern Africa. The morning air is crisp and clean, carrying the scent of dew-wet grass and the faint sweetness of wild flowers. I sit up slowly, my muscles stiff from sleeping on the ground, and look around me with fresh eyes. In the soft light of dawn, the ruins take on a different character. Where yesterday they seemed mysterious and vaguely threatening, today they appear welcoming, almost expectant, as if they have been waiting patiently for someone to discover their secrets. I stand and stretch, working the kinks out of my back and shoulders. The wall that sheltered me through the night stretches away in both directions, its massive stones now visible in their full glory. The craftsmanship is even more remarkable in daylight. Each block has been carefully shaped and fitted, creating a surface that is both functional and beautiful. The wall follows the natural contours of the hillside, rising and falling with the terrain in a way that seems organic, as if it grew from the earth itself. I pack my gear quickly, eager to explore while the morning light is still soft and golden. The entrance to the Great Enclosure, for that is what archaeologists have named this massive stone complex, lies a few hundred yards to the south. I make my way toward it, following the curve of the outer wall, my feet crunching on the dry grass that has claimed the spaces between the ancient pathways. The entrance, when I reach it, is both imposing and inviting. The wall rises to its full height on either side, creating a narrow passage that forces visitors to approach in single file. It is a defensive feature, certainly, but also a ceremonial one. Anyone entering the Great Enclosure would have felt the weight of those towering stones, would have understood that they were crossing from the ordinary world into a place of power and significance. I pause at the threshold, feeling the same sense of awe that must have struck countless visitors over the centuries. The passage is cool and shadowy, the stones on either side worn smooth by the passage of time and weather. Here and there, I can make out the faint traces of ancient decorations, geometric patterns carved into the rock, so weathered they are barely visible but still present for those who know how to look. Taking a deep breath, I step through the entrance and into the great enclosure itself. The space that opens before me is vast, much larger than it appeared from outside. The inner wall curves away in a great arc, creating an oval space that must be more than 800 feet in circumference. The floor is carpeted with grass and scattered with the fallen stones of collapsed buildings, but the overall impression is one of order and purpose. This was not a random settlement but a carefully planned city, designed by architects who understood both engineering and aesthetics. I begin to walk the perimeter, staying close to the inner wall. The stones here are even more impressive than those of the outer wall, if such a thing is possible. Some blocks are enormous, weighing several tons each, yet they have been fitted together with such precision that the joints between them are almost invisible. The wall rises and falls in a series of terraces, following the natural slope of the hillside while maintaining its structural integrity. It is a masterpiece of engineering, built without the aid of mortar, relying instead on the skill of the masons and the natural weight of the stones to hold everything in place. As I walk, I begin to notice details that were invisible from a distance. The wall is not uniform in construction. There are actually several distinct building phases, each with its own style and technique. The earliest sections are built of smaller stones, fitted together with careful attention to detail but without the massive blocks that characterize the later phases. These later sections represent a period of great prosperity and ambition, when the rulers of Great Zimbabwe could command the resources and labor needed to quarry and transport stones of unprecedented size. Embedded in the wall at regular intervals are what appear to be drainage channels, carefully carved gutters that would have carried rainwater away from the foundations. It is a practical feature, but also an artistic one. The channels are beautifully proportioned and decorated with simple but elegant patterns. Every aspect of this place shows the same attention to both function and beauty, the same understanding that a great city must be both practical and inspiring. I pause to examine one section of the wall more closely. The stones here are different from the rest, darker, with a different texture and grain. They must have come from a different quarry, perhaps one that was closer to the city or produced stone of higher quality. The masons who built this wall were skilled not just in construction but in the selection and preparation of materials. They understood the properties of different types of stone, knew which would weather well and which would provide the best structural support. The morning sun is higher now, casting longer shadows across the enclosure. In this light, I can see that the space is not empty but filled with the remains of smaller structures. Low walls mark the foundations of buildings that once stood here, houses perhaps, or workshops or storage buildings. The arrangement suggests a complex social hierarchy, with the most important structures occupying the choicest locations and the humbler buildings relegated to the periphery. I make my way toward the center of the enclosure, where the most substantial ruins are located. Here, the remains of what must have been a significant building rise several feet above the grass. The walls are thick and well-preserved, built of the same fine stonework as the Great Wall but on a smaller scale. This was clearly a building of importance, perhaps a palace or temple, where the rulers of Great Zimbabwe conducted their most important business. As I explore the ruins of this central building, I begin to find artifacts scattered in the grass. A piece of pottery, glazed in a deep blue that speaks of connections to the Islamic world. A fragment of Chinese porcelain, its delicate patterns still visible after centuries of exposure to the elements. A carved stone bead, polished smooth and decorated with intricate patterns. These small objects are like messages from the past, evidence of the far-reaching trade networks that made Great Zimbabwe wealthy and powerful. The pottery shard is particularly intriguing. It is clearly local manufacture, made from the clay of this region, but the glazing technique is foreign, learned from Arab traders who brought Islamic artistic traditions to the courts of African rulers. The deep blue color is achieved with cobalt, a mineral that was traded across vast distances in the medieval world. This single fragment tells a story of cultural exchange, of African craftsmen adapting foreign techniques to create something uniquely their own. The Chinese porcelain is even more remarkable. It is a piece of celadon, the pale green pottery that was prized throughout the medieval world for its beauty and durability. This particular fragment shows the classic celadone glaze, with its subtle color variations and network of fine cracks that develop over time. It must have traveled thousands of miles to reach this place, carried by Arab merchants across the Indian Ocean, then by African traders up the coast and inland to the plateau where Great Zimbabwe stands. I hold the fragment up to the light, marveling at its delicate beauty. In the courts of Song Dynasty China, this would have been an everyday object used for serving tea or rice. But here, in the heart of Africa, it was a treasure, a symbol of wealth and international connections. The fact that it was discarded here, in what appears to be a refuse pit, suggests that the rulers of Great Zimbabwe had access to so many luxury goods that even Chinese porcelain could be treated as expendable. The stone bead is perhaps the most mysterious of my finds. It is made of soapstone, a soft mineral that is easy to carve but durable enough to last for centuries. The bead is perfectly round, with a hole drilled through the center for stringing. But it is the decoration that catches my attention. A series of geometric patterns that spiral around the surface, creating an optical illusion that makes the bead seem to move when I turn it in the light. This is not the work of a casual craftsman but of a skilled artist, someone who understood both the technical challenges of carving in stone and the aesthetic principles that make an object beautiful. The patterns are not random but follow a mathematical logic, creating a sense of rhythm and balance that is pleasing to the eye. This bead was not just a piece of jewelry but a work of art, created by someone who took pride in their craft and understood the power of beautiful objects to inspire and delight. As I continue my exploration, I begin to understand the layout of the Great Enclosure more clearly. The space is divided into distinct areas, each with its own purpose and character. Near the entrance, there are the remains of what appear to be workshops, areas where craftsmen worked metal, carved stone, and created the luxury goods that made Great Zimbabwe famous throughout the medieval world. The floors of these workshops are littered with the detritus of their trade, scraps of metal, fragments of carved stone, pieces of pottery that were broken in the making. Farther from the entrance, the buildings become more substantial and formal. These were the living quarters of the elite, the palaces and administrative buildings where the rulers of Great Zimbabwe conducted their daily business. The walls here are thicker, the construction more elaborate, the decorative elements more refined. These were buildings designed to impress, to demonstrate the wealth and power of their occupants. At the very center of the enclosure, I find the most intriguing structure of all, the remains of what can only be described as a temple. The building is circular, its walls rising in a series of terraces that must once have supported a conical roof. The masonry here is the finest I have seen, with stones fitted together so precisely that the joints are almost invisible. The entire structure gives the impression of having been carved from a single block of stone. So seamless is the workmanship. I walk slowly around the temple, studying its construction and trying to understand its purpose. The entrance faces east, toward the rising sun, suggesting that this was a place of worship where the daily cycle of light and darkness held religious significance. The walls are decorated with carved symbols that are badly weathered but still visible. Birds with outstretched wings, geometric patterns that might represent the sun or stars, human figures in poses of worship or supplication. Inside the temple, the floor is paved with carefully fitted stones that have been worn smooth by centuries of use. At the center of the space, there is a circular depression that might have held a fire or some other ritual object. The walls rise around this central space in a series of niches, each one perfectly proportioned and decorated with its own carved symbols. The overall effect is one of harmony and balance, a space designed to focus the mind and spirit on higher things. As I stand in the center of this ancient temple, I feel a profound sense of connection to the people who built it. They were skilled architects and engineers, certainly, but they were also people of deep spiritual conviction. This building was not just a place of worship but a statement of faith, a declaration that the natural world was sacred and that human beings had a responsibility to honor the forces that govern their lives. The morning is advancing, and the sun is climbing higher in the sky. The shadows that earlier provided cool relief are shrinking, and I can feel the heat beginning to build. But I am reluctant to leave this place, This temple that has stood for 7 centuries and may stand for 7 more. There is something about the quality of light here, the way it falls through the gaps in the ruined walls and creates patterns on the ancient stones, that makes me want to linger. I sit down on one of the fallen stones and close my eyes, letting the sounds and scents of the morning wash over me. The air is filled with the buzz of insects and the distant call of birds. Somewhere nearby, a small animal rustles through the grass, perhaps a mongoose or a ground squirrel. The wind carries the scent of the savanna, dry grass, dust, the faint sweetness of acacia flowers. But beneath these immediate sensations, I sense something else. A deeper quiet, a stillness that seems to emanate from the stones themselves. It is as if the very walls are holding their breath, waiting for something or someone. I open my eyes and look around me, half expecting to see a figure emerging from the shadows, a priest or priestess come to conduct some ancient ritual. But there is only the play of light and shadow, the eternal dialogue between sun and stone that has continued unchanged for centuries. The temple ruins hold secrets that may never be fully revealed. The written records of Great Zimbabwe are sparse, and much of what we know about the city comes from archaeological evidence and oral traditions that have been passed down through generations. But sitting here in this sacred space, I feel that some truths transcend the need for written records. This was a place where people came to commune with the divine, to seek guidance and blessing, to celebrate the cycles of life and death that govern all human existence. I stand and begin to make my way back toward the entrance, but I walk slowly, reluctant to leave this enchanted place. Each step reveals new details, new evidence of the skill and artistry of the people who built Great Zimbabwe. A carving here, a carefully shaped stone there, a drainage channel that demonstrates both practical engineering and aesthetic sensibility. This was not just a city but a work of art, created by people who understood that human beings need beauty as well as shelter, inspiration as well as security. Near the entrance, I pause to examine one final section of the wall. Here, the stones are smaller and more weathered, suggesting that this is one of the earlier phases of construction. But even in these older sections, the craftsmanship is remarkable. The masons who built this wall were skilled in techniques that have been lost to time, able to create structures of incredible durability without the aid of modern tools or materials. I place my hand on the warm stone, feeling the texture of the granite beneath my palm. These stones were quarried from the hillside nearby, shaped by hand with simple tools, then carried to this place and fitted together with mathematical precision. The work must have taken years, perhaps decades, and required the coordinated effort of hundreds of skilled craftsmen. It is a testament to the organizational ability of the rulers of Great Zimbabwe, their capacity to mobilize resources and labor on a scale that few medieval societies could match. As I finally step through the entrance and back into the outside world, I turn for one last look at the Great Enclosure. The morning sun is now high enough to illuminate the entire structure, revealing its full majesty. The walls rise like cliffs from the grassland, their stone surface glowing golden in the light. This is one of humanity's greatest achievements, a monument to the skill and vision of the people who built it, a reminder that Africa has always been home to great civilizations and remarkable accomplishments. The stones of Great Zimbabwe have stood for 7 centuries, weathering storms and droughts, wars and peace, the rise and fall of empires. They have witnessed the arrival of Arab traders and Portuguese explorers, the coming of colonial governments, and the birth of modern nations. Through all of these changes, they have remained constant, silent witnesses to the passing of time and the endurance of human achievement. I shoulder my pack and begin to walk toward the next section of the ruins, eager to continue my exploration. But I carry with me the memory of this morning, the sense of wonder and reverence that filled me as I walked among these ancient stones. Great Zimbabwe is more than just an archaeological site. It is a place where the past and present converge, where the achievements of our ancestors speak to us across the centuries, reminding us of our capacity for greatness and our responsibility to honor those who came before us. Part 3. The Conical Tower and Sacred Places. Target: -25,000 characters. The path leading away from the Great Enclosure winds upward through scattered granite boulders, each one worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. The morning sun has gained strength, and I can feel its warmth on my back as I climb. The savanna stretches out below me, an endless sea of golden grass punctuated by islands of dark green where ancient baobab trees stand like sentinels against the sky. But my attention is drawn upward, to the rocky outcrop that rises above the valley floor like a natural fortress. This is the hill complex, the oldest part of Great Zimbabwe and perhaps the most sacred. Archaeological evidence suggests that people have been coming to this place for over 1,000 years, drawn by something in the landscape that spoke to them of power and mystery. The granite formations here are extraordinary. Massive boulders balanced precariously on top of one another, creating natural caves and passages that seem almost deliberately arranged for ceremonial purposes. As I climb higher, the path becomes steeper and more challenging. The route follows natural ledges and clefts in the rock, sometimes requiring me to scramble over boulders or squeeze through narrow passages. It is clear that this was not a place for casual visitors. The difficulty of the ascent would have served as a natural barrier, ensuring that only the most determined pilgrims reached the sacred spaces at the summit. Halfway up the hill, I pause to catch my breath and look back at the great enclosure below. From this vantage point, I can see the full scope of the ruins spread out across the valley floor. The massive stone walls that seemed so imposing from ground level now appear as elegant curves traced across the landscape, following the natural contours of the terrain with mathematical precision. The entire complex covers more than 1,800 acres, making it one of the largest archaeological sites in sub-Saharan Africa. But it is not just the scale that impresses me, it is the harmony between the built environment and the natural landscape. The builders of Great Zimbabwe understood that their city was not separate from the natural world but part of it. They worked with the existing topography, using the granite outcrops as foundations for their walls and incorporating the natural drainage patterns into their urban design. The result is a city that seems to grow organically from the earth itself, as if it had always been there. I continue my ascent, following a narrow path that switchbacks up the face of the cliff. The granite here is weathered into fantastic shapes, pillars and arches, caves and crevices that create a natural sculpture garden. Ancient peoples would have seen spirits in these formations, would have understood this place as a dwelling of the ancestors where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was thin. The path leads me through a natural gateway formed by two towering granite pillars. The space between them is just wide enough for a single person to pass through, and the walls on either side are covered with ancient markings, petroglyphs that may be thousands of years old. The symbols are simple but evocative. Spirals and circles, human figures with outstretched arms, animals that might be cattle or antelope. These are among the earliest human marks on this landscape, evidence of the spiritual significance this place has held for countless generations. Beyond the gateway, the path opens into a series of terrace platforms built into the natural rock formations. These are the work of the same skilled masons who built the Great Enclosure, but here they have worked with the existing granite structures, creating walls and enclosures that seem to emerge naturally from the living rock. The masonry is even more refined than what I saw below, with stones fitted together so perfectly that the joints are almost invisible. I explore these terraces methodically, trying to understand their purpose and significance. Some appear to be defensive positions, with walls positioned to command strategic views of the surrounding countryside. Others seem more ceremonial in nature, with carefully constructed altars and ritual spaces that would have been used for religious ceremonies. The entire complex gives the impression of having been designed as a sacred theater, where the drama of ancient religious life was played out against the backdrop of the natural world. As I climb higher, the structures become more elaborate and mysterious. I find myself in a narrow passage carved directly into the living rock, its walls smooth and polished as if worn by the passage of countless pilgrims. The passage is just wide enough for a single person, and it curves and twists as it follows the natural fissures in the granite. Walking through it feels like being inside the very bones of the earth, surrounded by stone that has witnessed the entire history of human civilization. The passage opens suddenly into a circular chamber carved from the solid rock. The walls curve upward to form a natural dome, and the only light comes from a narrow opening in the roof that allows a shaft of sunlight to penetrate the darkness. The floor is paved with carefully fitted stones, and around the perimeter of the chamber are a series of niches, each one containing what appears to be a ritual object. Carved stones, pottery vessels, metal implements whose purpose I can only guess at. This is clearly a place of great significance, a sanctuary where the most important religious ceremonies were conducted. The acoustic properties of the chamber are remarkable. Even a whisper echoes and reverberates, creating an otherworldly sound that would have enhanced the mystery and power of any ritual conducted here. I can imagine priests chanting in this space, their voices multiplied and transformed by the stone walls until they seem to come from the very spirits of the ancestors. In the center of the chamber, I discover something that makes my heart race with excitement. Carved into the floor is a series of channels that form a complex geometric pattern. Spirals within spirals, creating a mandala-like design that draws the eye inexorably toward the center. The carving is worn smooth by age and use, but the pattern is still clearly visible, etched deep into the granite by craftsmen who understood the power of sacred geometry. This is not simply decoration but a functional part of the ritual space. The channels would have carried water or other liquids during ceremonies, creating patterns of flow that would have been laden with symbolic meaning. The spiral design is found in many African cultures, representing the cycle of life and death, the connection between the earthly and spiritual realms, the eternal dance of creation and destruction that governs all existence. As I study the carving more closely, I notice that the spirals are not random but follow a mathematical pattern. The proportions are precise, creating a sense of harmony and balance that is pleasing to the eye and soothing to the mind. This is the work of sophisticated mathematicians as well as skilled craftsmen, people who understood that beauty and meaning could be combined in physical form. I spend long minutes in this chamber, letting its atmosphere wash over me. The silence is profound, broken only by the distant call of birds and the whisper of wind through the opening in the roof. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of earth and stone. It is a place where time seems suspended, where the boundaries between past and present become blurred. Reluctantly, I leave the chamber and continue my ascent. The path beyond becomes even more challenging, requiring me to climb over massive boulders and navigate through narrow crevices. But with each step, I feel myself drawing closer to something important, something that will help me understand the true significance of this place. Near the summit of the hill, I encounter the structure that has drawn me here, the Conical Tower. It rises from the granite platform like a stone finger pointing toward the sky, its walls curving inward as they ascend to create a perfect cone. The tower is built from the same fine masonry as the rest of the complex, but here the craftsmanship reaches its absolute peak. The stones are fitted together with such precision that the entire structure seems to have been carved from a single block of granite. The tower stands 30 feet high, its base surrounded by a series of concentric walls that create a labyrinthine approach. To reach the base of the tower, visitors must follow a specific path that winds through these walls, a journey that would have been laden with ritual significance. The path is paved with carefully selected stones, each one positioned to create a specific pattern or symbol. Walking this path would have been a form of meditation, a way of preparing the mind and spirit for whatever ceremony awaited at the tower's base. The tower itself is solid. There is no entrance, no interior space, no way to climb to its summit. Its purpose was not practical but symbolic, a marker that announced the sacred nature of this place to anyone who could see it. The tower would have been visible from great distances, a beacon that drew pilgrims from across the region to this place of power and mystery. As I walk around the base of the tower, I begin to understand its deeper significance. The structure is oriented to align with certain celestial events, the rising and setting of the sun at the solstices, the position of specific stars and constellations that held religious meaning for the people who built it. This is not just a monument but an astronomical instrument, a means of connecting earthly ritual with the movements of the heavens. The precision of the tower's construction is breathtaking. The stones are cut and fitted with such accuracy that the entire structure maintains perfect symmetry despite its considerable height. The wall tapers as it rises, creating a sense of upward movement that draws the eye skyward. The proportions are mathematically perfect, creating a harmony that is both intellectually satisfying and emotionally moving. Around the base of the tower, I find evidence of the rituals that were once conducted here. The stone platform is marked with channels and basins that would have held water or other ritual liquids. There are mounting holes for posts or poles that might have supported temporary structures during ceremonies. Most significantly, there are a series of small chambers built into the surrounding walls, each one containing what appears to be a ritual deposit, pottery vessels, carved stones, metal objects that were placed here as offerings to the spirits. In one of these chambers, I make a discovery that sends a thrill of excitement through me. Nestled in a niche carved into the wall is a carved stone bird, its wings spread wide as if in flight. The carving is exquisite, capturing every detail of the bird's anatomy with remarkable accuracy. The stone is smooth and polished, worn by centuries of handling, and the entire piece glows with a warm, golden light in the afternoon sun. This is the famous Zimbabwe bird, the symbol that now appears on the nation's flag and coat of arms. But seeing it here in its original context, I understand that it is much more than a national symbol. It is a spiritual artifact of profound significance. The bird represents the connection between earth and sky, between the physical and spiritual worlds. In many African cultures, birds are seen as messengers of the ancestors, capable of traveling between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. The craftsmanship of the bird is extraordinary. Every feather is carefully carved, every curve of the wing precisely rendered. The bird's head is turned slightly to one side, as if listening to some distant sound, and its beak is open as if it is about to speak. The eyes are particularly striking. They seem to hold a wisdom that transcends the merely physical, a knowledge that comes from soaring above the concerns of earthly existence. I hold the bird carefully, feeling its weight and texture. The stone is warm to the touch, heated by the sun but also seeming to radiate its own inner warmth. The carving is so lifelike that I can almost imagine the bird stirring in my hands, ready to take flight and carry messages to the ancestors on behalf of the living. The bird is not alone in its niche. Surrounding it are other ritual objects, carved stones in the shape of various animals, pottery vessels decorated with geometric patterns, metal implements whose purpose I can only guess at. This is clearly a treasury of sacred objects, items that were used in the most important ceremonies and then stored here for safekeeping. As I examine these objects more closely, I begin to understand something of the religious system that governed life in Great Zimbabwe. The birds are not simply decorative. They are spiritual tools, objects that were believed to have the power to carry prayers and offerings to the ancestral realm. The various animals represented, cattle, antelope, birds of prey, each had their own symbolic meaning, their own role in the complex web of belief that connected the living with the dead. The pottery vessels are equally significant. Many are decorated with patterns that echo the spiral designs I saw in the chamber below, suggesting a unified symbolic system that permeated every aspect of religious life. The vessels would have held offerings, food, drink, incense, or other materials that were believed to nourish the spirits and maintain the connection between the physical and spiritual worlds. I spend the rest of the afternoon exploring the summit of the hill, discovering chamber after chamber filled with ritual objects and sacred spaces. Each area seems to have had its own specific purpose. Places for animal sacrifice, areas for the preparation of ritual objects, chambers where priests would have consulted oracles and received messages from the ancestors. The entire complex is designed as a kind of spiritual machine, a place where the daily work of maintaining the connection between earth and heaven was carried out with scientific precision. As the sun begins to sink toward the western horizon, I make my way to the highest point of the hill complex. Here, on a platform of natural granite, I find what may be the most sacred space of all. A simple circle of stones with a fire pit at its center. The stones are undecorated, worn smooth by centuries of use, but they radiate a power that is almost tangible. This is where the most important rituals were conducted, where the rulers of Great Zimbabwe communed with the spirits of their ancestors and received guidance for governing their people. I sit on one of the stones and watch the sun set over the savanna below. The sky is painted in shades of gold and crimson, and the air is filled with the sound of birds returning to their roosts. In the distance, I can see the walls of the Great Enclosure glowing in the last light of day, a reminder of the human achievement that this place represents. But up here, surrounded by the sacred spaces of the hill complex, I feel connected to something even deeper than human achievement. I feel the presence of the ancestors, the spirits of the people who built this place and invested it with such profound meaning. They are not gone. They are still here, still watching over this place, still ready to communicate with those who approach with respect and understanding. As darkness falls, I prepare to make my camp on the summit. The stone platform is hard, but I am honored to spend the night in this most sacred of places. The stars emerge one by one, brilliant in the clear air, and I can understand why the ancient people saw in them the eyes of the ancestors, watching over the living with love and protection. The night is filled with sounds: the distant roar of a lion, the call of a nightjar, the rustle of small creatures in the grass below. But here on the summit, surrounded by the sacred stones, I feel completely safe. This is a place of power, a place where the natural and supernatural worlds intersect, where the ordinary rules of existence are suspended in favor of something higher and more mysterious. I fall asleep under the stars, my head pillowed on my pack, my body warmed by the stone that has absorbed the heat of the day. My dreams are filled with visions of the past, processions of priests climbing the sacred path, ceremonies conducted around the fire pit, the voices of ancestors speaking through the wind and the stones. And through it all, the stone bird watches with its ancient eyes, a guardian of secrets that span the centuries, a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the eternal. Part 4. Visions of the Golden Age. Target. -25,000 characters. I wake not to the silence of ruins but to the sound of voices, hundreds of them, speaking in languages I do not recognize but somehow understand. The stone platform beneath me is no longer cold and empty but warm with the bodies of people moving purposefully about their daily tasks. I sit up, confused and disoriented, and realize that the world around me has transformed completely. Where moments ago there were only scattered stones and windswept grass, now there stands a living city in the full flower of its prosperity. The Conical Tower rises beside me, no longer weathered and alone but surrounded by a complex of buildings that pulse with life and activity. Smoke rises from countless cooking fires, and the air is filled with the sounds of commerce, the lowing of cattle, the ring of hammers on anvils, the voices of merchants haggling over prices in a dozen different languages. This is Great Zimbabwe as it was 6 centuries ago, at the height of its power and influence. The vision is so vivid, so complete, that I can smell the wood smoke and cooking food, can feel the heat of the sun on my face and the press of bodies around me. I am witnessing the golden age of one of Africa's greatest civilizations, the period when this city controlled the gold trade that connected the interior of Africa with the markets of the Indian Ocean. I stand and begin to move through the crowd, marveling at the diversity of people who have gathered here. There are the local Shona people, who built this city and rule it with such skill, but there are also visitors from far away, Arab merchants in flowing robes, Indian traders with their distinctive turbans, perhaps even Chinese officials come to negotiate directly for the goods that flow through this crucial commercial hub. The merchants are everywhere, their stalls and temporary structures filling every available space within the Great Enclosure. I watch as a group of Arab traders examine a collection of gold ornaments, their practiced eyes assessing the purity and craftsmanship of each piece. The gold gleams in the sunlight, worked into intricate patterns that speak of sophisticated metallurgical techniques and artistic vision. These are not crude bars of raw metal but finished products of extraordinary beauty and complexity. One of the merchants holds up a golden bracelet, its surface covered with delicate filigree work that must have taken weeks to complete. The pattern is geometric but organic, inspired by the natural forms of the savanna, the spiral of a shell, the curve of a horn, the branching of a tree. The craftsmanship is equal to anything produced in the great cities of the Islamic world, proof that the artisans of Great Zimbabwe were masters of their craft. I move closer to listen to the negotiations. The Arab merchant speaks in Arabic, his words translated by a local interpreter who seems equally comfortable in both languages. The discussion is complex, involving not just the price of the gold but questions of quality, quantity, and delivery schedules. This is not a simple barter system but a sophisticated commercial network that operates according to well-established rules and customs. The merchant produces a small bronze scale, its arms perfectly balanced and its weights carefully calibrated. The gold is measured with scientific precision, each piece weighed against standardized weights that ensure fair dealing. The scales themselves are works of art, their bronze surfaces decorated with Islamic calligraphy and geometric patterns that speak of their origin in the workshops of distant cities. As the negotiations continue, I notice that the local ruler's representative, a dignified man in elaborately decorated robes, is taking careful notes on a tablet made of wood and wax. The writing system is not one I recognize, but the careful attention to detail suggests that these records will be preserved and consulted in future transactions. This is a literate society, one that understands the importance of written records in maintaining complex commercial relationships. The gold being traded comes from mines scattered throughout the region, some of them hundreds of miles away. I can see, in my mind's eye, the long lines of porters who carry the precious metal from the mining sites to the markets of Great Zimbabwe. They travel along well-established routes, protected by the ruler's soldiers and guided by merchants who know every water hole and safe camping place along the way. The mining itself is a sophisticated operation. The miners are skilled professionals who understand the geology of the region and know how to extract gold from both surface deposits and deep shafts. They use iron tools of high quality, smelted in furnaces that reach temperatures hot enough to produce steel. The mining sites are not random diggings but carefully planned operations that maximize yield while minimizing environmental damage. I watch as a caravan prepares to depart for the coast, bound for the port city of Sofala, where Arab dhows wait to carry the gold across the Indian Ocean. The caravan consists of hundreds of porters, each carrying a carefully weighed load of trade goods. The organization is military in its precision, with scouts to go ahead and guards to protect the valuable cargo from bandits or wild animals. The leader of the caravan is a man of obvious importance, his robes richly embroidered and his bearing that of someone accustomed to command. He carries a staff of office topped with a carved bird, perhaps a miniature version of the great stone birds I found in the hill complex. This is no ordinary merchant but a high official of the court, someone entrusted with the ruler's most important commercial missions. The goods being transported are not just gold but a wide variety of products that speak to the diversity of Great Zimbabwe's economy. There are ivory tusks, some of enormous size, that will be carved into luxury objects in the workshops of India and China. There are leopard skins and other exotic furs that will adorn the robes of distant potentates. There are ingots of copper and iron, raw materials that will be worked into tools and weapons in foreign forges. But perhaps most interesting are the finished products, pottery, metalwork, and textiles that demonstrate the high level of craftsmanship achieved by the artisans of Great Zimbabwe. These goods are not crude exports but sophisticated manufactured items that can compete with the best products of the medieval world. The pottery is particularly impressive, with glazes and decorative techniques that rival the work of Islamic ceramists. As the caravan moves out through the gates of the Great Enclosure, I follow it in my vision, watching as it makes its way across the landscape toward the coast. The journey to Sofala takes many weeks, following ancient trade routes that wind through valleys and over mountain passes. The route is marked by a series of trading posts and rest stops, each one a small settlement that exists to serve the needs of the merchant caravans. The landscape through which the caravan travels is not the empty wilderness I saw in my own time, but a countryside dotted with villages and farms. The population is dense and prosperous, supported by the wealth that flows from the gold trade. The farmers grow crops not just for subsistence but for sale to the merchant caravans, creating a market economy that extends far beyond the walls of Great Zimbabwe itself. I see the caravan crossing rivers on ferries operated by local communities, paying tolls that help support the infrastructure of trade. The ferries are well-built craft, capable of carrying heavy loads across even the largest rivers. The operators are skilled professionals who understand the seasonal patterns of flooding and know how to navigate safely in all conditions. At night, the caravan camps in fortified enclosures that provide protection from wild animals and human enemies. These camps are not temporary structures but permanent installations, built and maintained by the rulers of Great Zimbabwe as part of their commitment to protecting trade. The camps are staffed by soldiers who know the local conditions and can provide guidance and protection to visiting merchants. The journey continues for weeks, through landscapes that change from the granite hills of the interior to the coastal plains where palm trees begin to appear. The climate becomes more tropical, the air more humid, as the caravan approaches the sea. Finally, after months of travel, the merchants catch their first glimpse of the Indian Ocean, its blue waters stretching to the horizon. Sofala, when they reach it, is a city that exists solely for trade. The harbor is filled with dhows from across the Indian Ocean, vessels from Arabia, India, and perhaps even China. The city itself is a cosmopolitan mixture of cultures, with Arab merchants, Indian traders, and local African peoples all mingling in the busy markets. The air is filled with the sound of different languages and the scent of exotic spices. The gold from Great Zimbabwe is offloaded from the caravan and carefully weighed and assessed by merchants who specialize in the precious metal trade. The quality is consistently high, a testament to the skill of the miners and metalworkers who produced it. The merchants know that gold bearing the mark of Great Zimbabwe is among the finest available anywhere in the world. In return for the gold, the merchants of Sofala offer goods that cannot be obtained in the African interior. There are Chinese porcelains of exquisite beauty, their glazes achieving colors and textures that seem almost magical. There are Indian textiles woven from silk and decorated with patterns that speak of ancient artistic traditions. There are glass beads from Venice, their brilliant colors created by techniques that are closely guarded secrets. But perhaps most important are the Islamic goods, books, scientific instruments, and luxury items that bring knowledge and culture from the great cities of the Muslim world. These goods are not just trade items but vehicles for the transmission of ideas and technologies that will enrich the civilization of Great Zimbabwe. The dhows that carry these goods back to Great Zimbabwe are marvels of medieval engineering. Built without nails, using only rope and wooden pegs, they are nevertheless capable of carrying heavy loads across thousands of miles of open ocean. The navigators who guide them are skilled professionals who understand the patterns of wind and current that govern travel in the Indian Ocean. I watch as one of these dhows prepares to sail for the Persian Gulf, its hold filled with African gold that will eventually find its way to the treasuries of Baghdad and Cairo. The captain is an Arab merchant who has been making this journey for decades, his knowledge of the African coast unmatched by any other navigator. He knows every reef and current, every safe harbor and dangerous passage. The relationship between Great Zimbabwe and the outside world is not one of simple extraction but of genuine partnership. The African rulers are not passive suppliers of raw materials but active participants in a complex international economy. They understand the value of their goods and drive hard bargains with foreign merchants. They also send their own representatives to foreign courts, establishing diplomatic relationships that protect their commercial interests. Back in Great Zimbabwe, the wealth from trade is transforming the city in remarkable ways. The rulers are investing in monumental architecture, creating buildings that rival anything in the medieval world. The Conical Tower is under construction, its massive stones being quarried from the nearby hills and shaped by skilled masons who understand both engineering and aesthetics. The workshops of the city are humming with activity. Goldsmiths work at their forges, creating objects of incredible beauty and complexity. The techniques they use are not primitive but sophisticated, involving the use of alloys and surface treatments that require deep understanding of metallurgy. The finished products are not just functional but artistic, demonstrating that the craftsmen of Great Zimbabwe see their work as more than mere commerce. Iron workers are equally skilled, producing tools and weapons that are superior to anything available in Europe at the same time. The iron is smelted in furnaces that reach very high temperatures, producing steel that is both hard and flexible. The smiths understand the properties of different types of iron ore and know how to create alloys that are perfectly suited to specific purposes. The textile workshops are producing cloth that rivals the finest products of India and China. The weavers use locally grown cotton as well as imported silk, creating fabrics with patterns and colors that are uniquely African. The dyes are extracted from local plants and minerals, creating a palette of colors that reflects the natural beauty of the African landscape. The pottery workshops are creating ceramics that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of clay chemistry and firing techniques. The glazes achieve colors and textures that are both beautiful and durable. The forms are elegant and functional, showing that the potters understand both the practical requirements of their craft and the aesthetic principles that make objects pleasing to the eye. But perhaps most impressive is the construction industry. The masons who are building the Great Walls of Zimbabwe are masters of their craft, able to cut and fit stones with precision that would be difficult to achieve even with modern tools. They understand the properties of different types of stone and know how to select materials that will weather well over time. The construction techniques they use are not primitive but sophisticated, involving the use of mathematical principles and engineering knowledge that is far in advance of what might be expected. The city is also investing in infrastructure that supports its growing population. Water systems bring clean water from mountain springs to public fountains throughout the city. Drainage systems carry away wastewater and prevent the flooding that could damage the stone buildings. Road systems connect different parts of the city and facilitate the movement of people and goods. The population of Great Zimbabwe at its peak may have reached 20,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in sub-Saharan Africa. The people come from many different ethnic groups, drawn by the opportunities that the city offers. There are the local Shona people who built the city, but there are also immigrants from other parts of Africa and even from across the Indian Ocean. The social structure of the city is complex and sophisticated. At the top are the rulers, who live in the elaborate palace complexes and control the trade that is the source of the city's wealth. Below them are the merchants and skilled craftsmen who create the goods that are traded across the Indian Ocean. At the bottom are the farmers and laborers who provide the food and manual labor that keeps the city functioning. But this is not a rigid caste system. There is considerable social mobility, with successful merchants and craftsmen able to rise to positions of influence and power. The rulers understand that their power depends on the prosperity of the entire community, and they work to create opportunities for all their subjects to share in the city's wealth. The religious life of the city is equally sophisticated. The great temple complexes are centers not just of worship but of learning and culture. The priests are skilled in astronomy, mathematics, and other sciences that are essential for maintaining the complex calendar system that governs agricultural and commercial activities. They also serve as advisors to the rulers, providing guidance on matters of state and diplomacy. The rituals conducted in these temples are elaborate and meaningful, connecting the daily life of the city with the deeper spiritual truths that govern human existence. The ceremonies mark the changing of the seasons, the cycle of agricultural activities, and the important events in the lives of individuals and the community as a whole. As I watch this vision of Great Zimbabwe's golden age, I am struck by the sophistication and complexity of the civilization that flourished here. This was not a simple society but a complex urban civilization that rivaled anything in the medieval world. The people who built this city were skilled architects, engineers, craftsmen, and traders who understood how to create wealth and prosperity through their own efforts and ingenuity. The vision begins to fade as the first light of dawn touches the horizon. The voices grow quieter, the buildings become translucent, and slowly the modern ruins reassert themselves. But the memory of what I have seen remains vivid in my mind. Great Zimbabwe was not just a city but a civilization, a testament to human achievement and ingenuity that deserves to be remembered and celebrated. As the last echoes of the vision fade away, I am left sitting on the cold stone platform, surrounded by the silent ruins of one of Africa's greatest cities. But now I understand what these ruins represent. Not just the remains of old buildings, but the foundation of a civilization that connected Africa with the wider world, that created wealth and prosperity through trade and industry, that built monuments to rival the pyramids of Egypt and the temples of India. The sun is rising, casting long shadows across the ruins and painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It is a new day, but the memory of Great Zimbabwe's golden age will remain with me forever. A reminder of what human beings can achieve when they work together with skill, vision, and determination. Part 5. The Spiritual Journey, Ancestors and the Zimbabwe Bird. Target. -25,000 characters. As the vision of the Golden Age fades, I find myself still sitting on the sacred stone platform. But now I am not alone. The carved stone bird I discovered yesterday rests in my hands, its smooth surface warm to the touch, as if it has absorbed not just the heat of the sun but something deeper, the accumulated prayers and hopes of countless generations. The bird's eyes, carved with such skill that they seem almost alive, stare into mine with an intensity that makes my heart race. Suddenly, the world around me shifts again, but this time the transformation is different. The stones do not rebuild themselves into living architecture, but instead they seem to become transparent, revealing the spiritual realm that exists alongside the physical world. I can see the ancestral spirits moving through the ruins, their forms translucent but unmistakably present. They are the guardians of this place, the keepers of the ancient wisdom that once governed life in Great Zimbabwe. The spirits are not frightening but welcoming, their presence filling me with a sense of peace and belonging. They move with purpose through the sacred spaces, conducting rituals that have continued unbroken for centuries, despite the physical abandonment of the city. I realized that Great Zimbabwe was never truly abandoned. It simply shifted from the physical realm to the spiritual one, becoming a place where the ancestors gather to watch over their descendants and guide them through the challenges of existence. An elderly woman, her form shimmering like heat waves rising from sun-warmed stone, approaches me. She is dressed in the traditional garments of a spirit medium, her body adorned with ceremonial jewelry that includes several carved birds similar to the one I hold. Her eyes are kind but hold depths of knowledge accumulated over lifetimes of service to the ancestors. Without speaking, she extends her hand toward the bird, and I understand that she is inviting me to participate in something sacred. I place the stone bird in her ghostly hands, and immediately it begins to glow with an inner light. The carving comes alive, its wings moving slowly as if it is preparing to take flight. The spirit woman begins to speak, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, explaining to me the true purpose of the Zimbabwe birds and their role in the spiritual life of her people. "The bird is the messenger," she whispers, her words seeming to come from the very stones around us. "It carries the prayers of the living to the realm of the ancestors and brings back guidance and blessing." Each bird is carved not just from stone but from the very essence of the connection between earth and sky, between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. As she speaks, I begin to understand that the birds are not merely decorative objects but functional spiritual tools. They are created through a process that combines physical craftsmanship with spiritual preparation. The carvers are not ordinary artisans but specially chosen individuals who have undergone years of training in both the technical skills of stone carving and the spiritual practices necessary to imbue the finished work with sacred power. The process begins with the selection of the stone itself. The granite used for the birds must come from specific quarries that are considered sacred, places where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds is thin. The stone is quarried not by ordinary workers but by ritual specialists who approach their task with the solemnity of a religious ceremony. Prayers are offered before the first tool touches the rock, and the entire process is conducted according to strict spiritual protocols. The carver who will shape the bird must purify themselves through fasting, ritual cleansing, and meditation. They must enter a state of spiritual receptivity that allows them to perceive the bird that already exists within the stone, waiting to be revealed. The carving process is not about imposing a design upon the material but about carefully removing the excess stone to reveal the spiritual essence that was always there. As the spirit woman continues her explanation, I can see the process unfolding before me. The carver sits in a sacred space, surrounded by the tools of their trade, chisels made from specially prepared iron, hammers that have been blessed by the ancestors, files and polishing stones that have been used by generations of spiritual artisans. The work proceeds slowly, with frequent pauses for prayer and meditation. Each cut into the stone is made with deliberate intention, guided not just by artistic vision but by spiritual insight. The carver must remain in constant communication with the ancestors, seeking their guidance on every detail of the work. The bird that emerges is not just a representation of a physical creature, but an embodiment of the spiritual forces that govern the connection between heaven and earth. The eyes of the bird are carved last, and this is the most crucial moment of the entire process. The carver must be in a state of deep spiritual communion, allowing the ancestors to work through their hands to create eyes that can truly see into both the physical and spiritual realms. When the eyes are complete, the bird is considered to be awakened, no longer just a carved stone but a living spiritual entity capable of carrying messages between the worlds. The completed bird is consecrated through elaborate ceremonies that involve the entire community. The priests conduct rituals that formally introduce the bird to the ancestral spirits, while the people offer prayers and gifts to ensure that the new messenger will be favorably received in the spiritual realm. The bird is then placed in its designated location within the temple complex, where it will serve as a permanent link between the living and the dead. I watch as the spirit woman demonstrates the use of the bird in ritual practice. She holds it gently, closing her eyes and entering a state of deep meditation. Her breathing becomes slow and regular, and her face takes on the serene expression of someone who has left the ordinary world behind and entered the realm of the spirits. The bird in her hands begins to glow more brightly, its carved wings seeming to flutter with life. Through the bird, the spirit woman is able to communicate with the ancestors, receiving guidance on matters both personal and communal. The messages come not as words but as images, emotions, and intuitive insights that she must interpret and translate for the benefit of the living. The process requires not just spiritual sensitivity but also deep knowledge of the cultural and religious traditions that give meaning to the ancestral communications. The role of the spirit medium in Great Zimbabwe society was one of enormous responsibility and respect. These individuals, usually women, served as the primary intermediaries between the living and the dead, helping to maintain the delicate balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. They were consulted on all major decisions, from matters of state to personal problems, and their advice was considered essential for the proper functioning of society. The training of a spirit medium began in childhood, with young people showing signs of spiritual sensitivity being identified and guided into specialized education. They learned not just the technical aspects of ritual practice but also the history and traditions of their people, the genealogies of important families, and the complex web of relationships that connected the living with the ancestral realm. The most skilled mediums were able to channel specific ancestors, allowing the spirits of deceased rulers, priests, and other important figures to speak directly to the living. These channeling sessions were elaborate affairs, conducted in the sacred spaces of the hill complex with the entire community participating. The medium would enter a trance state, often aided by rhythmic drumming, chanting, and the use of sacred herbs, and then allow the ancestral spirit to possess their body and speak through their voice. I witness one such ceremony as the spirit world continues to reveal itself to me. The ghostly forms of the ancient community gather in the circular chamber I discovered earlier, their translucent bodies filling the space with a soft, ethereal light. At the center of the gathering, a spirit medium sits cross-legged on the stone floor, her body surrounded by ritual objects, carved birds, pottery vessels filled with sacred herbs, iron implements that have been blessed by generations of ancestors. The ceremony begins with the lighting of a sacred fire in the central depression of the floor. The flames are not ordinary fire but spiritual essence made visible, burning without wood or fuel and casting shadows that seem to move independently of their sources. The medium places a handful of dried herbs into the flames, and the smoke that rises carries the prayers of the community upward to the ancestral realm. The drumming begins slowly, a deep, rhythmic pulse that seems to resonate through the very stones of the chamber. The drummers are not visible, but their music fills the space with a power that transcends the merely physical. The rhythm is not random but follows patterns that have been passed down through generations, sequences of beats that are believed to facilitate communication with specific categories of ancestors. As the drumming intensifies, the medium begins to sway, her movements becoming more pronounced as she enters deeper levels of trance. Her breathing changes, becoming deeper and more regular, and her face takes on an expression of profound concentration. The carved birds around her begin to glow more brightly, their eyes seeming to track the movements of invisible presences that dance through the smoke-filled air. Suddenly, the medium's posture changes completely. Her back straightens, her head lifts, and when she opens her eyes, I can see that she is no longer herself but has become a vessel for an ancestral spirit. The voice that emerges from her throat is not her own but deeper, older, carrying the authority of someone who has seen the rise and fall of kingdoms and the turning of the great wheel of time. The ancestor who speaks through her is a former ruler of Great Zimbabwe, a king who governed during the height of the city's power and prosperity. His message is one of guidance for the living, advice on how to maintain the spiritual practices that ensure the continued protection and blessing of the ancestral realm. He speaks of the importance of maintaining the sacred spaces, of conducting the proper rituals, and of remembering the ancestors not just as distant figures from the past, but as living presences who continue to participate in the life of the community. The king's message is delivered in the ancient language of the court, but I find that I can understand every word. He speaks of the golden age I witnessed in my vision, describing it not as a time of material prosperity alone, but as a period when the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds was perfectly maintained. The wealth of Great Zimbabwe was not just measured in gold and ivory, but in the strength of the connection between the living and the dead. He explains that the carved birds were not merely religious artifacts, but essential tools for maintaining this spiritual balance. Each bird was attuned to specific aspects of the ancestral realm, allowing the living to communicate with different categories of spirits depending on their needs. Some birds were dedicated to the spirits of former rulers, others to the ancestors of specific families, and still others to the great spirits who govern the natural world. The king describes the elaborate ceremonies that were conducted to maintain these connections. The most important of these was the annual Festival of the Ancestors, a week-long celebration that brought together people from across the kingdom to honor the dead and renew the spiritual bonds that held society together. During this festival, the hill complex would be filled with pilgrims who came to seek guidance from the ancestors and to offer prayers for the welfare of their families and communities. The festival began with a purification ceremony, where participants cleansed themselves ritually before entering the sacred spaces. The purification involved not just physical washing but spiritual preparation through fasting, meditation, and prayer. Only those who had properly prepared themselves were allowed to participate in the most sacred rituals, ensuring that the ceremonies maintained their spiritual power and effectiveness. The central event of the festival was the Great Ancestral Feast, where the spirits of the dead were invited to share food with the living. Tables would be set up throughout the hill complex, laden with the finest foods and drinks that the kingdom could provide. The carved birds would be placed at the center of each table, serving as conduits through which the ancestors could participate in the feast. As the festival progressed, individual families would conduct their own ceremonies, using their personal birds to communicate with their specific ancestors. These private rituals were deeply personal affairs, where family members would share their hopes, fears, and concerns with the spirits of their deceased relatives. The ancestors would respond with guidance, comfort, and sometimes warnings about challenges that lay ahead. The festival concluded with the Great Council of the Ancestors, where the spirits of former rulers would communicate their guidance for the coming year. This was the most important political event of the year, as the decisions made by the living rulers were expected to reflect the wisdom and desires of the ancestral realm. The carved birds played a crucial role in this process, serving as the primary means of communication between the living and the dead. As the ancient king's message comes to an end, the medium's posture relaxes, and she returns to her normal state of consciousness. But the ceremony is not over. Other ancestors take turns speaking through her, each one offering their own guidance and wisdom. I hear from priests who speak of the proper conduct of rituals, from craftsmen who share the secrets of their trades, and from ordinary citizens who offer advice on the challenges of daily life. Through it all, the carved birds serve as the essential link between the worlds. They glow and dim in response to the spiritual energies that flow through the chamber, their eyes tracking the movements of invisible presences that dance through the smoke-filled air. I begin to understand that these birds are not just beautiful objects but sophisticated spiritual technologies, tools that allow human beings to transcend the limitations of the physical world and commune directly with the realm of the divine. The ceremony continues through the night, with different ancestors speaking through the medium and offering their guidance to the community. Each message is carefully recorded by scribes who understand the importance of preserving the ancestral wisdom for future generations. The records they create are not just historical documents but sacred texts that will be consulted whenever the community faces difficult decisions or challenges. As dawn approaches, the intensity of the ceremony begins to diminish. The ancestral spirits gradually withdraw, their messages complete, and the medium returns to her normal state of consciousness. The carved birds cease their glowing, becoming once again simple objects of stone and artistry. But the connection that has been established between the living and the dead will continue, maintained through daily rituals and the constant presence of the birds in their sacred spaces. The spirit woman who has been my guide throughout this experience approaches me once more. She places the now quiet bird back in my hands, and I feel its weight and warmth as a reminder of the profound spiritual reality I have witnessed. Her voice, still carrying the authority of the ancestors, speaks to me one final time. "The birds remember," she says, her words echoing through the sacred chamber. "They remember the time when the living and the dead walked together, when the wisdom of the ancestors guided every decision, when the spiritual world was as real and present as the physical one. The city may have fallen, the people may have scattered, but the birds remain, carrying the memory of what was and the promise of what could be again." As she speaks, I understand that my journey to Great Zimbabwe has been more than just a physical exploration of ancient ruins. It has been a spiritual pilgrimage, a journey into the heart of a civilization that understood the fundamental interconnectedness of all existence. The carved birds are not just artifacts from the past but living links to a wisdom that transcends time and space, reminders that the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds is far more permeable than we might imagine. The spirit woman begins to fade as the sun rises higher, her form becoming more translucent until she is just a shimmer in the morning air. But before she disappears completely, she offers me one final gift, a glimpse of the future, a vision of how the wisdom of Great Zimbabwe might yet play a role in the world to come. I see the carved birds being discovered by archaeologists, studied by scholars, and eventually finding their way into museums where they will continue to serve as messengers, carrying the story of African civilization to people around the world. But more than that, I see the spiritual principles that the birds represent, the importance of maintaining connections with the ancestors, the value of seeking guidance from those who have gone before, the understanding that wisdom is not just an individual possession but a collective inheritance that must be preserved and transmitted to future generations. These principles, embodied in the carved stone birds of Great Zimbabwe, offer lessons that are as relevant today as they were 6 centuries ago. As the vision fades and I return fully to the present moment, I am left holding the stone bird, its carved eyes still seeming to watch me with ancient wisdom. The ruins around me are silent once more, but they no longer seem empty or abandoned. They are filled with the presence of the ancestors, the accumulated spiritual energy of centuries of ritual and devotion, the living memory of a civilization that understood the true nature of existence. I carefully place the bird back in its niche, knowing that it belongs here, in this sacred space where it can continue its ancient work of connecting the living with the dead. As I prepare to leave the hill complex, I carry with me not just the memory of what I have experienced but a deeper understanding of the spiritual dimensions of human existence. The carved birds of Great Zimbabwe are more than just beautiful artifacts. They are teachers, guides, and guardians of a wisdom that the world desperately needs to rediscover. Part 6. The Decline and Modern Reflections. Target: -25,000 characters. As I begin my descent from the sacred hill, the weight of centuries seems to press down upon me. The stone bird's eyes, though I have left it behind, seem to follow me still, and in their ancient gaze I begin to see not just the glory of Great Zimbabwe's golden age but the shadows of its decline. The vision that comes to me now is darker, more troubling, filled with the kind of inexorable sadness that accompanies the end of all great civilizations. The transformation begins gradually, almost imperceptibly. The year is perhaps 1400, and the great city still thrums with activity, but there are subtle signs that all is not well. The trading caravans that once departed monthly for the coast now leave less frequently, their loads smaller, their leaders more anxious about the dangers of the journey. The merchants who gather in the Great Enclosure speak in hushed tones about problems in the north, about new powers rising that threaten the ancient trade routes. I watch as a council meeting takes place in the hill complex, the ruler and his advisors gathered around the sacred fire to discuss the challenges facing their kingdom. The carved birds that once glowed with spiritual energy now seem dimmer, their connection to the ancestral realm weakened by the growing crisis that threatens to tear the fabric of their society apart. The problems are multiple and interconnected, like a web of difficulties that tightens with each passing year. The first and perhaps most serious is environmental. The population of Great Zimbabwe has grown beyond the capacity of the local ecosystem to support it sustainably. The forests that once covered the hills around the city have been cut down to provide fuel for the countless forges and furnaces that process the gold and iron that form the backbone of the economy. Without the trees to hold the soil in place, erosion has become a serious problem. The red earth that once supported abundant agriculture now washes away with each rainy season, leaving behind rocky, barren ground that cannot sustain crops. The streams that once ran clear and full are now muddy and seasonal, their flow disrupted by the changed landscape. The very success of Great Zimbabwe has created the conditions for its environmental destruction. The agricultural crisis is compounded by overgrazing. The vast herds of cattle that are both a source of wealth and a symbol of status have grown too large for the available pasture. The grasslands around the city are trampled and overgrazed, turning to dust under the hooves of too many animals. The delicate balance between human activity and natural regeneration has been broken, and the land is beginning to rebel against the demands placed upon it. I witnessed the slow starvation of the soil, the gradual death of the streams, the inexorable advance of erosion that threatens to undermine the very foundations of the great stone walls. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe, for all their wisdom and skill, have not understood the limits of their environment. They have treated the land as an inexhaustible resource, not recognizing that their prosperity depends on maintaining the delicate ecological balance that sustains all life. The environmental crisis leads inevitably to social and political upheaval. As agricultural production declines, the population of the city begins to suffer from periodic famines. The surplus that once supported the elaborate court structure and the extensive bureaucracy begins to shrink. The ruler finds it increasingly difficult to maintain the loyalty of his subjects when he cannot provide them with the basic necessities of life. The gold mines, too, are showing signs of exhaustion. The easy surface deposits that made the early prosperity of Great Zimbabwe possible have been worked out, and the deeper deposits require more labor and more sophisticated techniques to extract. The cost of gold production rises while the quantity of gold available for trade decreases. The economic foundation of the kingdom is crumbling beneath the weight of its own success. The political structure of Great Zimbabwe, which once seemed so stable and enduring, begins to fracture under these pressures. Regional governors, faced with declining revenues and increasing demands from the central government, begin to assert their independence. The elaborate network of tribute and loyalty that once held the kingdom together starts to break down as local leaders find it more profitable to pursue their own interests than to support the increasingly impoverished central authority. I watch as the great trading expeditions become less frequent and more dangerous. The routes to the coast, once protected by the authority of Great Zimbabwe, are now contested by rival powers who see opportunity in the kingdom's weakness. Bandit groups, made up of displaced people from the environmental disasters, prey on the merchant caravans. The profits from trade, already reduced by the declining gold production, are further eroded by the increased costs of protection and the losses from raids. The international situation is changing as well. The arrival of Portuguese explorers on the coast in the late 15th century disrupts the traditional Arab-dominated trade networks that have enriched Great Zimbabwe for centuries. The Portuguese, with their superior naval technology and aggressive commercial practices, begin to establish their own trading posts and to demand direct access to the sources of gold and ivory. The Arab merchants, who have been the primary intermediaries between Great Zimbabwe and the wider world, find their position increasingly undermined by European competition. The prices they can offer for African goods decline, while the cost of imported luxury items increases. The delicate balance of international trade that has sustained Great Zimbabwe's prosperity for centuries begins to shift in ways that favor the new European powers over the traditional African kingdoms. Within the city itself, the signs of decline become increasingly visible. The great construction projects that once demonstrated the power and wealth of the rulers are abandoned, their massive stones left scattered where they fell. The workshops that once hummed with activity become silent as the demand for luxury goods decreases and the materials to make them become scarce. The population of the city begins to decline as people migrate to areas where they can still make a living from the land. The spiritual life of the community suffers as well. The elaborate ceremonies that once connected the living with the ancestral realm become less frequent and less well attended. The priests who once served as intermediaries between the human and divine worlds find their influence waning as people lose faith in the traditional beliefs that once gave meaning to their lives. The carved birds, those sacred messengers that once glowed with spiritual energy, seem to grow dim and lifeless as the connection between the worlds weakens. I witnessed the last great ceremony conducted in the hill complex, a desperate attempt to restore the spiritual connections that once made Great Zimbabwe strong. The assembled priests and mediums call upon the ancestors for guidance, but the responses are faint and ambiguous. The ancient wisdom that once provided clear direction for the community seems to have withdrawn, leaving the living to face their challenges alone. The final abandonment of Great Zimbabwe is not a sudden catastrophe but a slow, grinding process that takes place over several generations. Families begin to leave the city in search of better opportunities elsewhere. The skilled craftsmen who once created the beautiful objects that made Great Zimbabwe famous migrate to other centers where their skills are still valued. The merchants who once coordinated the complex trade networks that connected Africa with the Indian Ocean move their operations to more profitable locations. The ruler and his court are among the last to leave, clinging to their ancient seat of power even as its foundations crumble around them. But eventually, even they must acknowledge that the great city can no longer sustain them. The final royal procession departs from the hill complex sometime in the mid-15th century, carrying with them the sacred objects and royal regalia that symbolize the continuity of their dynasty. The stone walls and buildings are left behind, too massive and too deeply rooted in the landscape to be moved. The great enclosures that once echoed with the sounds of commerce and ceremony fall silent. The terraced gardens that once fed the population are reclaimed by the wild grass of the savanna. The roads that once carried caravans to distant markets are overgrown with thorns and forgotten by all but the spirits of those who once walked them. Yet even in abandonment, Great Zimbabwe does not truly die. The spiritual forces that once animated the city continue to inhabit its ruins, waiting for a time when they might be called upon again. The carved birds, though no longer actively tended by human hands, continue their ancient vigil, their stone eyes watching over the empty spaces where life once flourished. The ancestors, though no longer actively consulted by the living, remain present in the stones and the wind, ready to offer guidance to any who might seek it. As I reach the bottom of the hill and look back at the ruins above me, I am struck by the profound melancholy of what I have witnessed. The decline of Great Zimbabwe is not just the story of one African city but a parable for all human civilizations. It speaks to the fundamental tension between human ambition and environmental limits, between the desire to build and grow and the need to live sustainably within the constraints of the natural world. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe were not evil or foolish. They were skilled administrators, wise leaders, and devoted servants of their people. But they made the same mistake that has been made by countless civilizations throughout history. They believed that their success was permanent, that their resources were inexhaustible, that their power was absolute. They failed to understand that all human achievements are temporary, that all civilizations must eventually face the consequences of their choices. The environmental lessons of Great Zimbabwe are particularly relevant to our modern world. The kingdom's decline demonstrates the consequences of deforestation, soil erosion, and overgrazing, problems that we face on a global scale today. The rulers of Great Zimbabwe had the wisdom to create a sophisticated urban civilization, but they lacked the understanding of ecological limits that might have made that civilization sustainable. Their failure serves as a warning to us about the importance of living within the carrying capacity of our environment. But the story of Great Zimbabwe is not just about environmental destruction. It is also about the fragility of complex systems, the way that small changes can cascade through interconnected networks to create large-scale transformations. The political, economic, and social structures that made Great Zimbabwe great were all interdependent, and when one part of the system began to fail, the effects rippled through the entire civilization. The decline of Great Zimbabwe also illustrates the importance of adaptability in human societies. The kingdom's leaders were skilled at managing the challenges of their golden age, but they were unable to adapt to the new conditions that emerged as their environment changed and their international situation shifted. They continued to rely on strategies that had worked in the past even when those strategies were no longer effective. Their inability to innovate and adapt in the face of changing circumstances contributed to their ultimate downfall. As I walk through the ruins in the growing heat of the day, I am also struck by the continuity that exists beneath the surface of apparent change. The people of Great Zimbabwe did not simply vanish when their city was abandoned. They dispersed throughout the region, carrying with them the skills, knowledge, and cultural traditions that had made their civilization great. The descendants of the builders of Great Zimbabwe continue to live in the area today, and many of the techniques and traditions that flourished in the ancient city can still be found in the surrounding communities. The spiritual traditions that animated Great Zimbabwe have also survived in modified form. The practice of ancestor veneration, the belief in the power of carved birds as spiritual messengers, the understanding of the interconnectedness of the physical and spiritual worlds. All of these elements of the ancient religion continue to influence the lives of people throughout Zimbabwe and southern Africa. The carved birds of Great Zimbabwe may be museum pieces today, but the spiritual principles they embody remain alive and relevant. This continuity suggests that the decline of Great Zimbabwe may be better understood as a transformation rather than a simple ending. The city as a physical entity was abandoned, but the civilization that created it continued to evolve and adapt to new circumstances. The skills and knowledge that built the great stone walls were applied to new challenges in new locations. The social and political structures that governed the kingdom were modified to meet the needs of smaller, more dispersed communities. The story of Great Zimbabwe thus becomes not just a tale of rise and fall but a complex narrative about the persistence of human culture in the face of changing circumstances. It demonstrates that civilizations are not just physical entities, buildings, roads, and monuments, but living systems of knowledge, tradition, and social organization that can survive even the abandonment of their original physical forms. As I prepare to leave the ruins and return to the modern world, I find myself thinking about the lessons that Great Zimbabwe offers to contemporary society. The environmental challenges that contributed to the kingdom's decline are familiar to us today: climate change, deforestation, soil degradation, and resource depletion. The political and economic problems that the rulers of Great Zimbabwe faced, managing growth, maintaining social cohesion, adapting to changing international conditions, are the same challenges that face leaders around the world today. The spiritual dimensions of Great Zimbabwe's legacy are perhaps even more relevant to our modern world. The ancient understanding of the interconnectedness of all life, the importance of maintaining connections with the ancestors, the value of seeking guidance from those who have gone before, these principles offer an alternative to the individualistic and materialistic values that dominate contemporary culture. The carved birds of Great Zimbabwe remind us that we are not isolated individuals but part of a continuous chain of being that connects us with both the past and the future. The cyclical nature of history that the story of Great Zimbabwe illustrates is both sobering and hopeful. It is sobering because it reminds us that no civilization, no matter how powerful or successful, is permanent. All human achievements are temporary, subject to the forces of change and decay that govern all existence. But it is also hopeful because it suggests that decline is not the end of the story. New forms of organization, new ways of living, new expressions of human creativity can emerge from the ruins of the old. As I take my final steps through the Great Enclosure, I carry with me not just the memory of what I have seen but a deeper understanding of the human condition. Great Zimbabwe was a remarkable achievement, a testament to the capability of human beings to create beauty, wealth, and meaning from the raw materials of the natural world. Its decline serves as a warning about the dangers of exceeding environmental limits and the importance of maintaining the spiritual connections that give life meaning. But perhaps most importantly, the story of Great Zimbabwe reminds us that we are all temporary custodians of the earth and its resources. The stones that make up the great walls of Zimbabwe will outlast us all, just as they outlasted the people who built them. Our responsibility is not to create permanent monuments to our own greatness, but to live in harmony with the natural world, and to pass on to future generations the knowledge and wisdom that we have inherited from the past. The sun is setting as I leave the ruins behind, painting the sky in the same shades of gold and crimson that have marked the end of countless days throughout the long history of this place. The carved birds of Great Zimbabwe will continue their ancient vigil, watching over the empty spaces where life once flourished, waiting for the time when human beings might once again understand the wisdom that they embody. In their stone eyes, I see not just the memory of a vanished civilization, but the promise of a future where that wisdom might be rediscovered and applied to the challenges of our modern world. The stones remember everything, and in their memory lies the key to understanding both where we have been and where we might yet go. The story of Great Zimbabwe is not finished. It continues to unfold in the lives of those who seek to understand its lessons and apply its wisdom to the challenges of our time. The birds are still singing, if we have ears to hear their song.